Mets and Knicks were in Game 5 when O.J. started that fateful drive. His four-way hazard lights were blinking, and no one knew what the Jews was thinking.
I've been to Reno, Chicago, Fargo, Minnesota, Buffalo, Toronto, Winslow, Sarasota, Wichita, Tulsa, Ottawa, Oklahoma, Tampa, Panama, Mattawa, La Paloma, Bangor, Baltimore, Salvador, Amarillo, Tocopilla, Barranquilla, and Padilla. I'm a killer. I've been everywhere, man. I've been everywhere, man. Crossed the desert bare, man. I breathe the mountain air, man. Of travel I've had my share, man. I've been everywhere.
This is Oversight Live, your advocate for good governance. We're putting the site back in. Oversight. Here's the watcher on the wall, your host, Ben Carpenter.
Hey, good evening. Good Thursday evening, folks. I am Ben Carpenter. This is Oversight Live, and this is Thursday, March 26th. Thanks for joining us this evening. What's Oversight Live, you ask? Well, in Alaska, our state capital and legislature is only accessible by air or by boat, by plane or by ferry. And it's prohibitively expensive for most Alaskans to be able to visit on a regular basis. So providing oversight of our state government is a greater challenge, burden for Alaskans than it is most Americans. So Oversight Live is your road to Juneau until we can build one. All right. A lack of a road's a major inconvenience, but today's technology affords us opportunities that it's no longer a valid excuse of not knowing what's going on. So we're going to bring you content like we do tonight. It's going to be relevant. This content's fresh. It was yesterday, filmed yesterday, so that you're going to be informed with the truth. You don't have to filter it through the liberal press. You don't have to do that. We're going to watch what happened on the record, live, and I'm going to help you understand what happened. If you got questions, holler, text them out in your social media app there. We're streaming on Facebook, X, and YouTube. So any one of those, you chat with me or chat with somebody else, and they're gonna see. I'm gonna see those questions, and I'll do my best to answer them on air. Look, you're gonna have my bias. You're not gonna have a liberal bias. My bias. I'm unabashedly a fiscal and social conservative, and you're gonna get that reference here. I'm gonna share what I think and how I see this through that lens. So you're going to have the opportunity to engage with me. If you think I'm wrong, you think I'm right, you can chat with others that are participating in the meeting. If you've got a good question, don't be surprised if I share it here. I mean, if you've got it, somebody else has got it. That's just the way it works. So again, the reason we're doing this is to edify the public here, to increase our awareness and our understanding of what's happening so that we can provide better oversight of our government. I spent 6 years in the legislature, in the state legislature here in Alaska, and I don't want that experience to go to waste. It is kind of like speaking a foreign language, and unless you go there and participate either as staff or as an elected member, it's kind of a foreign concept. So I'm going to share as much as I can of my experience with you to help you understand what's actually going on down there. If you have questions and you're watching the recording, drop a line to producer@oversightlive.com, and I will do my best to answer your question on air or shoot you an email. Okay. We're going to attempt to have some fun as well. Some people think that government, watching and providing oversight and being involved in our community is not fun, but it's a labor of love for me. So we're going to have fun. Let's get started. All right. Tonight, we're going to answer the mail. One of you, and I don't remember exactly who it was yesterday, asked, or maybe it was 2 days ago. Nope, it was yesterday, asked if we could have a conversation about a particular meeting. And I said, yeah, let's do that. So I've got queued up here the House Resources Committee from yesterday. That would be March 25th. It's the 1 p.m. meeting. And they're talking about a bill called HB 381. And let me quick add that here so I can show you what bill that is. Sorry. Okay, you go to the legislature and you akleg.gov, and you're going to see this this bill. If you search for HB 381 up top here, you're going to see this bill. All right, so what is this? It's currently in House Resources. It then goes to Finance. It's oil and gas property tax, also muni tax. This is how it was created by House Rules Committee by request of the governor. Okay, so this is a governor's bill. An act relating to the taxation of certain natural gas pipeline property relating to municipal taxation limitations, established an alternative volumetric tax on natural gas throughput, relating to the allocation of revenue from alternative volumetric tax. Okay, so it's a tax bill. It's a governor's tax bill. He wants to adjust the tax status or the tax regime in the state with regard to the gas pipeline that's being discussed. So that's what this committee is going to be about. We can go ahead and stop sharing that because we don't really need to read the bill right at the moment. What we do need to go to is the other thing that I want to show you, which is the video. Okay. Here we go. I got it. There we go. All right. We'll make this as big as possible so you can see, because there'll be some slides here. All right. So let's get going. This is at the beginning of the meeting. We'll watch as much as makes sense, and then you stop me if you've got questions here. And I'm going to stop if I've got comments or questions. So let's get rolling.
81, creating an alternate volumetric tax for the Alaska LNG project. We have Adam Prestige, president of Glenfarne, Alaska LNG LLC, and Mark Begich online, back in the room to kick off the presentation today, followed by staff from the Department of Revenue. Please join us at the table. And we also have Matt Kissinger in the room. And Mr. Begich, please begin your presentation. Oh, we cannot hear you.
Okay, they're going to take a minute here to figure this out. I'm going to fast forward it. Technical difficulties.
We'll take.
Absolutely. This is Mark Begich. I am a contractor, Northern Compass Group with Brownstein Hyatt, which is a contractor with the Governor's Office, State of Alaska, for the purposes of this legislation or other issues around oil and gas. Madam Chairs, let me first start by saying thank you very much, especially for Monday's meeting. I'm going to be brief because the meat of this meeting
if that doesn't make sense, that's former Senator Mark Begich.
Legislation HB 381. Again, we can't emphasize enough how important this project is in the long term for Alaska's long-term economic health, and also the goal of making sure we have long-term, stable, reliable, and affordable energy for Alaska. I do want to make the point that the number one priority of the project is affordable and reliable energy for Alaska, followed by export opportunity that could create revenue stream for Alaska, and then also driving economic development for the state. Today, you're going to hear a lot of detail, and I know on Monday we had a lot of great questions, good discussion. We have this kind of broken in multiple parts, but the first part will be by Glenfarne and AGDC, just to answer some of the questions you had on Monday, but also just to go through kind of the purpose of this legislation. And then Department of Revenue will go in more detail all the way down to how they create the formulas and all those elements, as well as, if you want, at the very end, they do have a sectional analysis section that they're happy to go through. I know on Monday, we had a lot of questions throughout the presentation. Madam Chair, I just asked your indulgence for a little time for them to make the presentation, as they will each slide kind of lead or add seats to.
All right, we're going to fast forward to get to
kick off, if I may, Chair, by talking a little bit about the historic background, to talk about how it is that we're talking so much about property tax right now. I've testified in a number of different hearings where I've talked about the history of the project in different phases. There was what I consider the first phase of the True LNG project, which was the producer-driven phase. And that was never going to really work because it was the wrong application of cost of capital. They were the wrong ones to carry the project forward. And then we went through the state-led phase in 2016, 17, and 18. And this was a lot of government-to-government relations, but really it lacked finding the right alignment and allocating the right risks and rewards to the right people. In 2019, we had a major change of tack. There was a change of a lot of the board members and a change of senior leadership of AGDC. And this is where we started what I call the alignment first, or the developer-led model. And as part of that, we implemented a stage gate process, which is very common in all major projects. And we set out that the first stage gate would be an economic stage gate. These are often called appraised stage gates, but it's where you go back and you look at the fundamentals of the project and determine whether it's worth continuing to proceed with the project or not. Exxon and BP during that time frame, 2019 and 2020, came and helped us. Actually, they funded us, and they also provided subject matter experts. And we worked with them and with the EPC company Fluor, a well-known company that's done a lot of work in Alaska. And we did a cost optimization process where we went through, and during the 2010s, you've had a lot of LNG projects built by developers in the US Gulf Coast. They had modularized a lot of things that hadn't been modularized in the first design of this project. And so we did that. It's called value optimization, or engineering optimization. And we were able to bring down costs. And then we went through what was called the economic stage gate. We presented this economic stage gate in June of 2020. And what we determined was that this project is economic. We had project financed it, we'd restructured it. There was different costs for gas supply and assumptions, and it was competitive, but it was sort of middle of the pack, and is still a big project that has a lot of cost overrun risk. And so we felt it needed to be optimized more. And that's when we identified 3 places to optimize it. One was gas price. We felt that the gas price assumptions were a bit high. You have to remember, this gas that we're buying from the producers is bought at the wellhead, which means that it's unprocessed gas. So this can't be compared to market gas. It still has a lot of CO2 in it, has trace H2S and other things that we have to remove. And that's why we have this, what we call the gas treatment plant, or Arctic carbon capture facility. And then the loan guarantees is another thing that we identified. So this is 2020. The loan guarantees for this project originated in ANGPA, the Alaska Natural Gas Pipeline Act of 2004. They were $18 billion at the time. They're inflation adjusted, so now they're about $30 billion worth. But they weren't at first written to be used on this project. They were written to be used on a project to build a pipeline down to North America and the US market. Obviously, shale gas made that not worth pursuing. And so in the bipartisan infrastructure law in November of 2021, our congressional delegation were able to amend the original ANGPA provision for loan guarantees so that they could be applied to this project. We also began negotiating, and we continue to negotiate, these lower gas prices that are more reflective of a market price for unprocessed North Slope stranded gas. And that did bring the assumptions down further, and we feel that we're working around the proper neighborhood of prices that you'll see later. We also launched a benchmarking study to look at the property tax. So we dealt with lower oil or the lowering of the gas price. We dealt with the loan guarantees, but we need to figure out where we even stood with respect to property taxes. So we hired Gas Strategies, and Gas Strategies came in. It's a well-known sort of intelligence firm for energy projects, and they did benchmarking around the US and around the world, including Canada, Mozambique, these other places. And what they found was in all other jurisdictions that we're competing with, there are some provisions. There are either tax holidays, there are PILTs, or there are just lower taxes. And you can see here in a number of jurisdictions just in the US where they utilize these mechanisms.
PILTs are payment in lieu of taxes. It's another structure. Instead of having taxes, you have payments that are made in lieu of, just so you know what the acronym means.
Honing in on the actual numbers, though, is where this really comes to light. We are 10 times greater under our current statutes, 10 times greater than the sort of next highest area for taxes. You can see here that'd be U.S. Cove Point, Maryland at 50 million. And if you do the math on ours, it would be around 500 million a year or more, depending on the capital involved in the project. We're not the only ones, though, or this Gas Strategies study was not the only ones to identify this. WoodMac also looked at this project in 2022, and that was a competitive analysis.
WoodMac is actually called Wood Mackenzie. That's another consulting firm that the Alaska State Legislature uses periodically for analysis of oil and gas projects or just questions to answer. They're the go-to subject matter expert that the Alaska Legislature has used for a very long time.
To sort of supplement what we had done through this economic stage gate. And in there, they identified property taxes as one of the largest burdens. They said it had the greatest impact of all the sensitivities other than CapEx overrun, cost overrun risk. And then just recently, Gaffney Klein presented their report that was, I believe it was sanctioned by the legislature or commissioned by the legislature. They presented this, I think it was last week, in Senate Resources. And the quote out of that presentation was, Alaska's property tax is one of the biggest potential burdens on project economics. So it's long been established that property tax was going to be a barrier to this project that we'd at some point have to deal with. It was identified even further, earlier than when I mentioned, even during the producer-driven efforts, there was this concept of PILT, and I think the Municipal Advisory Gas Pipeline Board. So that leaves us where we are today. Adam.
Thank you.
This is interesting because when I was in the legislature and circa 2020, 2021, 2022, I'm participating as a legislative member of the AGDC board. I'm not a voting member. I just attend their boards and pay attention. And off the record, I would want or have this question, and it had been a question that I never really got an answer to, meaning they didn't really want to talk about it. I was like, what is the situation with property tax and our tax structures? When does the legislature need to start addressing this to help move this project forward? Okay. So this is, 6 years ago now that this conversation, I attempted to have it with AGDC. It was premature. Like they did not want to have the conversation. They kind of just, brushed me off more or less. Yes, it will be a conversation. We'll have to address it, but now's not the time, and we don't want to talk about it. So, and I can understand that. There was a lot of things need to go on, but this is clear. This gentleman is from AGDC. It's clear that this needs to be addressed, and we have to address it one way or the other. This legislature is going to make it right, or they're going to screw it up.
Matt, this is Adam Prestige for the record, through the chair. So
Adam Prestige is Glenfarne.
When we talk about property tax reform and we talk about its impact, we're not just talking about numbers on a spreadsheet. We're talking about real impacts to the project and real impact to Alaskans. When Glenfarne came into the project, and every day since, our driving goal on the gas line has been to deliver the lowest possible cost gas to Alaskans as quickly and as safely as possible. This alternative tax proposal is a key element in doing that. Anytime you have a major cost associated with the project, that cost is ultimately borne by those who pay for the gas. The revenue to pay for to build this project and to pay for all of the costs associated with the project come from customers buying gas on the other end of the pipeline. So essentially, this current existing property tax has a direct impact on consumer energy bills. The property tax proposal that we have in front of you will lower energy bills for Alaskan families, for governments, and for government entities. As we'll discuss more, our proposal is a volumetric tax. And that might be a term that is not readily familiar to everyone. It is a tax based not on the property itself, but on the volume of gas that is transported on the pipeline. In a sense, we view this as being a very positive way to align our interests and to reflect the value that the project is delivering by saying, if we're transporting more gas, we're going to pay more taxes. It incentivizes for the state more gas to be transported because it produces more revenue. It also works well for the project because it means that as the tax goes up, the revenues that are being generated by the pipeline will be going up at the same time. And so we see that this volumetric tax structure is the best way to align the interests of the project, the state, and the ratepayers. We'll talk much more about this throughout this presentation, and DOR will talk about this, but our view is that the implementing this property tax reform has a very significant impact on the actual ultimate price of gas. And so in some sense, the price of gas could be as much as 25% higher if the property tax remains in place unchanged. That comes down very significantly with this alternative tax that we are now proposing. Next slide. Why is this important to the project? A major capital project like this requires certainty and predictability. It's very capital intensive, and so as lenders and investors come into a project like this, they're saying, how much is this going to cost? What are the annual expenses? How can we forecast the next 30 years of this project to get a sense of how much it will cost and where the investment will be paid and how the loan will be repaid? Putting this volumetric tax is very transparent. It's very forecastable. You simply need to look at how much gas is flowing on the pipeline. There's a % cost per unit of gas transported, and that's your tax. And so what this alternative tax proposal avoids is the potential for years of litigation over the value of the property, relitigation. And I can tell you that lenders or investors would take that uncertainty and reflect it in how they loan and invest in this project. It comes at a real cost. Again, just to reiterate what Matt Kissinger stated, the current 2 mil property tax rate is significantly higher than the tax rate imposed on comparable North American LNG projects. It is a critical part of the development path for any major piece of infrastructure like this in order to align communities and ultimately, as I said, here in Alaska, deliver the lowest possible cost gas to Alaskans.
With that, we would like to invite our colleagues from Department of Revenue to come up.
Okay, so I just wanted to pause just very briefly. My thoughts on this from Adam's Prestige's point here is he did a very good, good is maybe the wrong word, but he tied the cost of gas to Alaskans to the property tax. So if you keep the property tax where it's at, expect to have higher cost gas. If you lower the property tax, expect to have lower cost gas. So of course, what do we say? We want lower cost gas. The flip side of this, people are going to say, oh, well, you're gonna reduce property taxes. Well, how are we going to get our fair share? Don't we have to charge property tax? Like, if you're not charging property tax, you're not getting your fair share. Okay. These are the competing sides of the argument, I believe. The proposal, from my perspective, that they're putting forward here is kind of like a sales tax, kind of like a consumption tax, where if you consume more, or you send more gas down the pipeline, you pay more in tax. Okay. So similar to a sales tax, where if you go buy more, you pay more tax. So I'm interested to see how this all shakes out here. And I hope they will get into some of the details, but it's a difference in paradigm of what we've been talking about with regard to taxation of what we've done, I think, in the past. All right.
Come up and walk through the actual bill and the impacts of it, where I think that it'll be enlightening to have all that information before we go through questions.
Yes, we can do that. We'll proceed with the Department of Revenue.
Great. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Welcome to the testifiers table and House Resources. Please put yourself on record and continue the presentation.
Thank you. For the record, Acting Director, Tax Division and Department of Revenue, Brandon Spanos.
Lisa, this was recorded yesterday, as the date says down in the bottom right-hand corner, if you can see it. This was from Wednesday, March 25th, the 1 p.m. House Resources Committee meeting.
And Dan Stickle, Chief Economist with Department of Revenue.
So I'll begin and just go over first a brief background about the current property tax that is in place in Alaska. So the state has a property tax at the state level that only applies to oil and gas property, which is property used in the exploration, production, or pipeline transportation of oil and gas. The property is centrally assessed by our division. Our property assessor assesses the property for both the state, and that applies for the munis as well. But the rates or the taxes levied at the municipal level and at the state level separately. The taxpayers can apply for a credit. When they pay their municipal tax, they get a credit on their state tax. So although the state assesses a 20 mil rate, if a muni has a 20 mil rate, you can get the entire tax credit when you file your tax return, or rather when you pay the tax and show the state that you paid it. Property taxpayers well, I already mentioned that. Sorry, I'll move on. So under current law, the Alaska LNG plant, or rather any LNG plant, is exempt from state tax level. However, the local property tax would apply to an LNG plant. So moving on to slide 12, I'll go over the proposed legislation in the bill. And so on slide 13, as we've already heard from the previous testifiers, the current property tax in place for Alaska is an economic burden on an Alaskan LNG project, and the tax would be passed on to the consumers, to include Alaskan residents. This bill would replace the state level property tax for the LNG project with an alternative volumetric tax that would be exempt, or rather it would exempt the project from the tax for a period of up to 10 years, and I'll get into that a little bit more in the next slide. Once the project reaches full capacity, the volumetric tax would be roughly equivalent to a 2 mil property tax. And we saw in an earlier slide, we said the current 2 mil tax, it's a 20 mil tax currently, but this volumetric tax would be equivalent to a 2 mil tax. So moving to slide 14, I'll walk through how the tax structure works under this proposal. So first, there is a defined ramp-up period, and this period lasts for the earlier of either 10 years of commercial operation, or the point at which the project's 30-day average pipeline throughput exceeds 1 billion cubic feet per day. So if that's earlier than 10 years, then that would be the trigger to turn on the volumetric.
So obviously there would be a incentive here to come in on average 30-day pipeline throughput to keep it just under 1 billion cubic feet per day. I don't even know whether we would ever reach 1 billion cubic feet per day in the lifetime of the project. I don't know. All I'm saying is this structure creates an incentive. If you've got a 10 years or 1 billion feet per day for 30 days, then, and you don't want to pay the tax, then you want to go with the 10 years and you're going to stay just under that 1 billion cubic feet per day to make it's incentivizing that behavior. Okay. Just to be clear and honest.
Tax. So once the ramp up period ends, the alternative volumetric tax is set at 6 cents per 1,000 cubic feet of natural gas moving through the pipeline. And from that point forward, the tax rate increases gradually by 1% each year. And finally, the levy is allocated based on where the infrastructure is located. So the 6 cents tax is shared among the local municipalities according to the portion of the project within each jurisdiction. And the section that fall within the unorganized borough would come into the state coffers. And overall, the tax structure is designed to give the project time to reach full operational capacity while ensuring stable, predictable revenue for both local governments and the state.
Okay, so we've got a conflict here that may not be clear, but we're going to discuss it just a minute here. So this is the ramp up period that they're talking about, which is the shorter of 10 years or when you've got throughput over 1 billion. Okay. So that ramp up could last as long as 10 years. So any tax policy that, or tax sharing or impact to local taxes, your borough taxes, municipal taxes, could last 10 years if it's that during that ramp up period. Now, if they get to over a billion cubic feet in over 30 days in the first 5 years or a first year, then your ramp up period ends, right? So I know that one of the conflicts here, one of the things that the boroughs are going to be concerned about is if the state preempts the tax policies that are currently in place, how do the boroughs recover their costs associated with the pipeline coming into existence, and especially down in the Kenai Peninsula borough and up in the North Slope borough, where you've got infrastructure being created, like a CO2 sequestration plant, or down in Nikiski where you have the terminus of the project down there. So you've got a terminal out in the water, and then you've got a liquefaction plant. The cost associated with that and the growth of the economy or growth of the population in that area is going to have additional costs, road maintenance, kids in schools, all of the above, right? So there's going to be additional cost associated with the project that the school district and the borough is going to have to pick up. So if the property tax, and that's how they would pick up the cost from the producer, from the project, is through property tax right now. So if the bill here is going to strip the borough of being able to assess a property tax, then how does the borough recoup the cost, the money that it's needed to deal with the real world issues of having an increased activity with this project? That's a legitimate concern that the legislature is going to have to grapple with. And I'm sure that the boroughs are going to provide some insight and some pushback here if they're not taken care of. So hopefully both Glenfarn, AGDC, and the legislature are taking this into account here. It appears, or what the slide is saying, is that the tax rate at the end of the ramp up period, which could be 10 years, the tax would be reset to 6 cents per thousand, and the tax rate would then increase by 1% per year. The 6 cents levy would be split. So if it's 10 years before there's a tax revenue, then how does your borough pick up the additional cost of this project, the associated impacts to the local community in the first 10 years? That's the question that's going to have to be asked and answered.
And now I'll turn it over to Dan for review of the fiscal note and the modeling.
All right, again, for the record, Dan Stickle, Chief Economist with the Department of Revenue. So starting with slide 16 looks at the revenue impact of the fiscal note. So as we were putting this together, we had some questions about exactly how to show the impacts of the bill on the fiscal note. The bill would result in lower state revenue if the gas line project were to go forward regardless of property tax relief. However, the developer and the Alaska Gas Line Development Corporation have stated that the project will not go forward without property tax relief. And so in the fiscal note, we are showing the revenue impacts of this bill as a positive to state revenue. The fiscal note shows only the state's share of the alternative volume.
Okay, so make me big so I can have your undivided attention. This is the very first time that I have heard anybody in government or AGDC or Glen Farn, and they're sitting at the table, Dan Stickle's the one that's talking, say anything related to, we have to address property tax or this project will not go forward. So this to me is a watershed moment. It is identifying that the project owner right now, Glen Farn, is saying this doesn't move without legislative action. Okay, so we're now here. You're going to help, or the project's not going to go forward. That's the picture that's being painted right now.
Volumetric tax revenue. Under our baseline scenario, we estimate that the state would receive about 12% of the total tax revenue from the bill. The remainder would go to the municipalities, and that's not reflected in our fiscal note. Looking at slide 17, so again, we discussed how to reflect this fiscal note with Office of Management and Budget and Governor's Legislative Office. The fiscal note protocol is to only show direct revenue from the impacted tax itself. So the fiscal note reflects our expected revenue from the alternative volumetric tax. Under our baseline scenario, it does not show the potential impacts of other revenue sources, which would include state corporate income tax, production taxes, property tax from new development, or state royalties. And what we've done is we've prepared some supplemental analysis, which is part of this presentation and also part of a supplemental document that we put together that details those other benefits above and beyond what's strictly included in the fiscal note itself. So slide 18 is a table that shows our estimated revenues from the alternative volumetric tax by fiscal year for the next 10 years through fiscal year 2036. There would be no revenue until we reach that 1 billion cubic feet per day threshold, and then fiscal years 2031 through 2033 represent the ramp up period, and then we are looking at full production through the project beginning in fiscal year 2034 in our baseline scenario. At full operations, the state receives about $9 million per year for its share of the new tax for the pipeline, the portion of the pipeline in the unorganized borough, and the remainder of the revenue from the new tax would go to municipalities, about $64 to $65 million per year. So our estimate for the purposes of the fiscal note, we assume that the alternative volumetric tax is allocated between the three components, the gas treatment facility, the pipeline, and the LNG export facility. We assume that that allocation is done based on the initial capital cost of each of those. And then for the pipeline portion where the state receives a component, we assume that that allocation is done based on the miles of the pipe in the unorganized borough versus organized boroughs. That is one assumption. We would develop regulations on exactly how to do that allocation for tax administration purposes, but that is the assumption that we've built into our fiscal note and our revenue modeling.
Okay, so what I've heard thus far tells me that the numbers that are being presented here for each one of the local municipalities is coming after the ramp up period. Okay, this is once the AVT tax, the alternate value tax. Did I get that? Their alternative volumetric tax is in place, but that's after the ramp up period. Okay. So we still have a 10-year period that they need to address of how the boroughs are going to be taken care of in the first 10 years and during that ramp up period. Okay.
In terms of expenditures on slide 19, the way the alternative volumetric tax is set up, it would create a new tax type within the tax division. So there would be some additional costs to administer this new tax. We estimate that we would need one additional staff position to carry out the administration of the new tax. And there would also be one-time costs for updating our tax revenue management system to incorporate the new tax type.
What does one human being do all year long with regard to managing a tax that gets set up on a pipeline that just operates as normal? What do they do 8 hours a day to have to manage this? Okay. I want the pipeline and I'm not going to squabble over one state worker position, right? But this is the way the government works. They're like, oh, we're going to implement a tax. We're going to have to bring somebody on because nobody wants to have that as an additional duty.
So the capital cost for that one-time upgrade would be estimated at $250,000, excuse me. And then slide 20 details the ongoing operating expenditures in the fiscal note for the one new position, averaging about $170,000 per year for salary and related expenditures.
So that's $170,000 position to manage the volumetric tax on a pipeline. Good gig.
And then the next set of slides gets into some detailed project modeling. Starting on slide 22. So I'm going to spend several slides walking through kind of our model structure and all of the detailed assumptions that go into it before I get into the results itself, just to really give context on where these numbers that I'm presenting came from. So our modeling is broken out into two main components. We have an upstream model. So this is a model that estimates cash flows and revenues to the producers on the slope before the gas is sold into the AKLNG project. So this would be the impacts of gas production on the producers, as well as any knock-on oil impacts due to expanded production on the North Slope. And then we have a separate midstream model, and this is where we estimate the cash flows and revenues from the AKLNG project itself. This includes modeling of the gas treatment plant, the pipeline, and the export facility. Slide 23. So our modeling is based on many assumptions, and this slide shows the sources of those various assumptions. The spring 2026 revenue forecast that was released earlier this month is the source of many of the assumptions into our modeling, including for oil prices, company spending, and oil production. Our official forecast does not include gas line sales revenue. So the gas line revenue would be over and above what's in the department's official forecast. That's been the protocol for the longstanding protocol of the department. Most of our project-related assumptions have been provided by AGDC, including key assumptions around project cost, gas pricing, and what the levels of additional upstream development would be that would be associated with the project. Slide 24 details some of the financial assumptions. So our modeling covers a period of 30 years.
I'm going to pause that for just a second and go back. There's something key here. Many people have been asking what is going on with the financing terms. Okay. So the project doesn't go forward until you've got buyers and sellers of gas, and then you've got financing terms to build a pipeline. So their modeling is somehow taking into account some kind of financing terms that have been shared with Department of Revenue from AGDC. I'm not sure whether that's public information yet, but I know there's a lot of people, and I can think of their names, that are wanting to see the financing terms of this project. So they didn't talk about it here in this briefing, or at least they haven't talked about it yet. It's just listed here as what they're modeling. The Department of Revenue economists are using to for the numbers behind the scenes to model what they think is going to happen. And we'll probably see some charts here that are graphs that'll model what they think is going to happen.
Department's official forecast. That's been the protocol for the long stand. We assume that the project would likely extend beyond that, but for modeling purposes, we model 30 years of full capacity and then 2 years of ramp up. So a total of 32 years of LNG sales in our modeling. We assume that there will be pipeline tolls set based on a 20-year period of full capacity, and that the developer will set those tolls based on a 10% internal rate of return. Again, that's an assumption that we can run sensitivities on. We assume a total project cost of about $46 billion in current 2026 dollars. That is based on a pre-Glenfarne project cost that was provided by AGDC. We've adjusted that to current dollars based on inflation. And again, understand that there's some uncertainty around that exact $46 billion number. And so we do run extensive sensitivities on different potential project costs.
That's probably not the number. It's probably more than that.
Slide 25 details some of the upstream assumptions. So we're assuming a gas purchase price of $1.50 per 1,000 cubic feet in 2026 dollars. That's based on advice from AGDC. And again, we have sensitivity analysis around that, since it is a key assumption into the project, what the price paid to the North Slope producers will be for the gas. We assume that initial phase 1 production will come from a source that is not Prudhoe Bay or Point Thompson. That could be Great Bear Pantheon. That could be another field on the North Slope. But Prudhoe Bay and Point Thompson are assumed to come in as part of phase 2, which is the full LNG export project. And we assume that those two fields will anchor the project.
Okay, so take this for what it's worth. If they build a pipeline and it never goes to phase 2 for some reason, the only gas that you would be getting at that point in South Central Alaska or even in Fairbanks is going to be from Great Bear Pantheon or some other field. Your majors there in Prudhoe Bay and Point Thompson aren't scheduled or aren't templated or projected to be producing gas into the pipeline if it's just the pipeline to Alaskans, right? That is a risk. It's probably a low risk. If they're going to build that portion of the pipeline, then there's going to be something tying it to the larger portion, or the export facility, I would hope. Maybe not. Maybe I need to stand corrected here, but it's interesting to note here that the source of the gas would not be from Prudhoe Bay or Point Thompson if you don't have an export facility that comes in phase 2.
For the majority of the project life. For Prudhoe Bay, we assume no impacts on oil production, and that is a significant assumption into the modeling. There's reasons that oil production could increase with gas sales. There's reasons that oil production could decrease with gas sales. We assume that those will roughly balance out, and so we are not modeling any change to Prudhoe Bay oil production. We do assume a significant increase in liquids production from the Point Thompson field. We assume that gas production will result in significant additional investment and development of that field, resulting in about 270 million barrels of additional oil production over the life of the field. And this additional oil production from Point Thompson is a major component of the state benefits when you look at the upstream impacts of this project. Slide 26 lays out the baseline tax assumptions. So in our baseline, before applying the proposed legislation, we do assume that the full 20 mils or 2% property tax would apply to the gas treatment plant and the pipeline, and then the LNG export facility, which is exempt from state taxation, would pay the municipal tax at 8 mils or 0.8%. We assume that the project developer would not be subject to state corporate income tax. and we assume that some, but not all, of the upstream producers would be subject to state or corporate income tax, which is in line with the current situation. For production tax, that is a very detailed and complex modeling project. We've fully modeled out our current tax law for production tax. For gas, there is a 13% gross tax with a tax ceiling that applies for qualifying in-state gas use. For oil, there is a net profits tax with a gross minimum tax floor. And our modeling includes the complex interactions between the oil tax, the gas tax, lease expenditures, and tax credits. Slide 27 highlights some of the key uncertainties in the modeling exercise. So these include prices. Oil and gas, as we've seen over the last month, oil prices are uncertain and volatile. So there's uncertainty around future oil price, future gas price, as well as the prices of various components that will feed into the project costs that the developer will incur. Uncertainty around the future of the LNG markets. Again, as we're seeing that play out in real time, that markets can change and can change quickly. Uncertainty over project timeline and costs, and then uncertainty over the upstream oil impacts. For Prudhoe Bay in particular, as I mentioned earlier, there could be increases or decreases to production. And as well, having the gas line in place could impact the economics and attractiveness of exploration and development and production of oil on the North Slope. And we, outside of the direct impacts to Point Thompson, we're not modeling any of those potential knock-on impacts to oil exploration and development. Slide 28. So two scenarios that we've modeled for purpose.
Yeah. That's not the one I wanted to share here. Where is it? Yeah, this here. So Craig, oil production drops when gas is not re-injected. Well, gas isn't the only thing they can re-inject. So I've heard both things, just like they said here, that it's possible to go both directions, that you have less oil production if you're drawing gas out, and you could have more oil production if you're drawing gas out. I think it depends on the well, and it depends on what's actually happening there. But natural gas isn't the only thing that you can put back in the ground. You can put carbon dioxide back in the ground, I guess. There's other gases. So I don't think that having natural gas come out and not having it available for re-injection is a showstopper. I think it just changes the dynamics or changes what's necessary in order for them to inject something back in. Maybe it's water or a water mixture of some kind. I'm repeating what I've heard. I am not an oil guy, or I'm not a gas guy. So I will stand corrected if somebody's got better information.
Of this analysis, and again, we have the ability to model many more scenarios. The current law scenario assumes that the Alaska gas line project would go forward without tax relief. And that is really just to provide a counterfactual to show what the economics and revenues would look like if there were not a tax change. And then we model what the revenues and cash flows would look like under this bill, which exempts the AKLNG project from state and municipal property tax and replaces with that alternative volumetric tax.
Okay, so what Dan Stickle just said is they've run their numbers to show the legislature what would happen if you didn't change any of the tax structure. And they're going to make the assumption that the project would go forward under those circumstances. So you'll be able to see what the dollar figure is if we did nothing to changing the tax structure. Okay. But what we heard earlier was that's not likely to happen. The project doesn't go forward unless the tax structure is adjusted. So that's really not a good assumption, but he's dealing with the legislature, and they're going to want to see what what would it look like if we did nothing? And then let's compare it to what it's going to look like if we do what you're asking us to do.
So slide 29 summarizes
current
the
law.
key outputs of our modeling under the current law and our baseline assumptions. Without any tax change under the baseline through 2062, we're looking at about $30 billion in state revenues, about $17 billion in municipal revenues, about $60 billion to the upstream producers, and about $70 billion to the midstream component. And to note, these are cash flows, not profits. So the expenses would be paid out of those cash flows that go to the upstream and midstream operators. In terms of cost of supply, our modeling results in a 2033 price of $4.86 per thousand cubic feet for in-state and $9.07 per thousand cubic feet for LNG sales. These would be the break-even prices for the sale of the gas to the utilities, not the prices paid by the end consumer. And slide 30 shows a chart of what those annual state revenues would look like under our current law analysis. So there would be a little over $200 million per year of property tax to the state and around $600 million per year of royalties and corporate income tax, and about $1 billion per year total revenue to the state from all revenue sources once you add in the oil and gas production tax. And you see in 2038 here, there's a dip in the production tax, and what that represents is kind of a one-time impact of some additional investments that we foresee would be needed at Point Thompson in particular to expand that field. Slide 31 summarizes the key outputs of the modeling under the proposed legislation, again with the same baseline assumptions. Through 2062, there would be $22.5 billion state revenue, which is a $7 billion reduction. There would be $4 billion of municipal revenue, which is about a $13 billion reduction. The $60 billion to the upstream producers would be the same. The alternative volumetric tax applies, it impacts the project developer, the state, the municipalities. It would not directly impact the upstream oil and gas companies. And then cash flow to the midstream is actually $1.5 billion less than under the current law scenario. And the reason for that is with lower costs, we assume that less cash flow and a lower price would be needed to generate the 10% internal rate of return for the developer. In terms of cost of supply, in looking at the 2033 prices with this legislation enacted, we show a $4.43 per thousand cubic feet in-state price, which would be 43 cents per thousand cubic feet reduction, and a LNG sales break-even price of $8.48 per thousand cubic feet, which would be a 59 cent per thousand cubic feet reduction. And again, these would be the break-even prices for sales to utilities, not the prices paid by end consumers.
Okay, so your electric utilities, or at least Instar, is going to get it at 848, and then your utilities are going to get it's going to be marked up from there, right? So interesting. I hope you weren't expecting cheap gas from the North Slope.
Slide 32 shows our annual revenues chart again under the proposed legislation. So it's a similar looking slide. It's about $200 million per year less across the board, and that represents the reduction in the state share of the property tax.
Okay, so I want to pause here and just say, you're going to hear a whole bunch of belly aching and complaints and words that say, oh, the state of Alaska and Alaskans aren't getting their fair share with whatever gets proposed here, right? That's going to come out. People are going to claim that we're not getting our fair share because there's a property tax reduction. Okay. This slide is meant to explain what we're going to get under the state revenues by year with regard to property tax, production tax, corporate income tax, royalties. Okay, so this is explaining that you're going to be getting money. The state is going to be getting money, even if we adjust the property tax to make the project go forward. Okay, so anybody says we're not getting our fair share, the argument then becomes define fair. And it's a legitimate argument. It's a legitimate question. One person might think something's fair and another person might think it's unfair. So that's where you got to have the votes. 21 and 11 is going to determine what's fair. And by 21 and 11, I mean 21 votes in the House and 11 votes in the Senate. Oh, and a governor's signature.
And so next we have a few sensitivity slides. And we know that there's a lot of uncertainties around some of the key assumptions in the AK LNG project. Two of the biggest uncertainties are what will that upstream gas cost or be the price that's paid to the producers? And then what will the ultimate capital cost of the project be? And so since we don't have final numbers on those, we can run sensitivity analysis. And so what this chart on slide 33 shows is the in-state break-even gas prices needed for the developer to break even with that 10% assumed rate of return. And we look at a range of $1 to $5 per 1,000 cubic feet for the gas purchase price. We start with our baseline $46 billion capital cost and run sensitivities on up to 100% higher capital cost. So what if the cost ends up being a little bit or a lot higher than that $46 billion?
Sure. This is a lot of information. Is it possible to just take a beat and just to kind of look at this and try to understand the chart? Because this is good information you've been working on. I want to understand as it's going through. Can we just take a beat just to understand the chart, please?
Sure, Representative Sadler.
It is being recorded.
And if I may ask questions then. So on the top, it's upstream gas price per MCF, base CapEx, 180, 60. That's what does that represent? Are taking a share? Or, just please explain the chart to me a little bit better, please.
Sure. Representative Sadler through the chair. So on the I guess the y-axis, so we have two sets of tables here. So we have our spring 2026 baseline, which is under current law with no property tax relief. And then we have proposed legislation, which is all else equal, but enacting the legislation before the committee. And what we're showing here is the break-even in-state gas price that the developer would require to achieve the assumed 10% internal rate of return for their investment.
Follow-up, Representative Sadler.
And that's the price that the producers would have to get, or the breaking price on whose?
Okay, we're not going to.
Representative Sadler through the chair, the producers.
Okay, we're not going to. I'm going to fast forward through this, helping Sadler out. But if Sadler's got questions, maybe other people have questions on this chart, because I guess it could be confusing. They said that the cost of the project was $46 billion. Okay. What if it's 20% more than $46 billion? Okay. What is the break-even point that the project needs to have if it is 20% more than $46 billion? Then you would just follow with the upstream gas prices of $1, $1.50, $2, and going up to a $5. So with a range between $1 and $5 that's kind of our options here. Paying more than $5 is not going to be an option, and paying less than $1 is not going to be an option. Okay, buyers are not going to buy it at more than $1 or more than $5, and well, they probably wouldn't buy it at $5. But sellers aren't going to sell it for less than $1. Okay, so this is the range of possibilities within the cost of the gas, right? So, and that's per MCF, 1,000 cubic feet. If the total cost of the project is 20% higher, break even at 428 at $1, break even at $1.50 of $4.92. And the $4.92 is that is the price of gas to, we go back a chart on the left-hand side. It's easier when I can jump between there. So that's this nominal cost of supply summaries. That's that dollar that's in the center of that chart. Okay. Let's jump back over there. Okay.
And what we're showing here is the break-even in-state gas price that the developer would require to achieve the assumed 10% internal rate of return for their investment.
Follow up, Representative
And
Sauter.
that's the price that the producers would have to get, or the breaking price on whose?
Representative Sadler through the chair. So at the top, we have the upstream gas price. That represents a sensitivity analysis on the price that would be paid to the producers.
Okay.
And then on the left-hand side, we have a capital cost. So our baseline capital cost is the $46 billion in real 2026 dollars.
Okay.
And we run sensitivities if capital costs are 20, 40, 60, 80, or 100% above that 46 billion. So basically between 46 and 92 billion of total
Okay.
capital cost.
Okay.
So what is the price paid to the upstream producers? What is the capital cost for the project? And then holding all the other assumptions equal per our baseline forecast or our baseline analysis, what would the in-state gas price for sales to the utilities, not to the end consumer, but for sales to the utilities, what would that gas price need to be for the developer to break even? What we see is in our baseline with our $46 billion capital cost and $1.50 per thousand cubic feet purchase price from the producers, this bill would reduce the break-even gas price from $4.86 sales to the in-state utilities down to $4.43 for sales to the in-state utilities.
Yeah, that works.
And you can see that based on just these two assumptions of capital cost and purchase price to the producers, there is a very significant range of potential.
Okay, so great range here. What you're likely going to see is the 46 billion is not 46, it's greater than that. And it's probably somewhere around the 20% greater or less. That's what I'm guessing. I don't know that for a fact, but I'm guessing maybe even as high as 40% higher. So I doubt it's going to be up in the upper range here. Okay. So current projection with current baseline taxing structure, 486 to your NSTAR. Proposed legislation makes it 443 to NSTAR, but if you're 20% greater, then it's 492, just under $5, but 492. Whereas under current structure, it would be over $5.43 to NSTAR. So with the proposed legislation, the gas to NSTAR would be less. Even if your 20% costs, you're 20% greater than $46 billion to build the entire project. I hope that is clear.
Prices and significant risk for the developer.
Okay, question. Question here. Anyone checking developer history on project price points or overruns? Someone is checking, right? Yeah, so you're talking about Glenfarne. Glenfarne's actually had a good track record of managing costs. At least that's what they've said, and that's what the information that I have seen. This is the largest project that they've ever undertaken. Okay, so there's not really anything to compare the size of this project to that Glenfarne's ever attempted, but they're a private company who's done a good job of managing the costs of the projects that they have done before. I don't know since it's a private company, I'm not sure how you would gauge whether that's trustworthy information. Like, where would you go to find the information from a private company? That like they don't have to report things like public companies do for being listed on the stock market and that type of thing. So we might be a little there might be some challenges in finding the truth of that matter, because it is a private company. But everything that I have seen and heard has said that Glenfarne has been good at managing their projects. Another question here. 46 billion. So Christopher, $46 billion project, it's going to overrun those prices by millions. Yeah. At least millions. It may be a couple $1 billion more than that. Was there talk of sustainability on ongoing maintenance cost projections? No, we haven't talked about maintenance and ongoing costs. I don't think there was projections for that, but that's going to be, I don't want to brush that question off, but I'm assuming that that's baked into the cost of the project and the maintenance, the operations of the cost going forward. And when they say they need 10% profit, that's already part of that concept, is the ongoing maintenance of the operations of the project. You also ask what analysis on what we are doing now compared to this and projections for future with this project. Any analysis on what we are doing now compared to this project? Well, this chart right here is a comparison against what we're doing now. The top part of this chart is the now picture, and the bottom part is the proposed legislation that they're talking about. If I didn't answer your question, re-ask it. Maybe there's something more specific you're looking for. Okay, let's catch up here.
I guess we're going to come back to this later.
Shows the break-even sales price for LNG delivered into the market. Under this bill, the break-even.
Okay, let me pause this and reframe us. Before I flipped back to that previous chart, and the dollar figure on the left-hand side of the graph was the $4 or $5. Now we're looking at the right-hand side of the graph that was $9 or $10. Now that's what this is comparing, the current tax regime versus the proposed legislation regime here. Okay. And the range if the cost of the project gets higher, which it probably will.
Even gas price under our baseline analysis would be reduced from $9.07 down to $8.48 per 1,000 cubic feet. And again, a significant range of potential prices presenting upside risk in particular to the developer.
Sure.
Representative Sadler.
Thank you. I'm not looking for $9.08 someplace in this chart. I'm not seeing it. Is there someplace I'm just missing it?
$9. It's under $1.50.
Under $1.50. Okay, very good. Okay.
Yeah, Representative Sadler through the chair. So apologies if I misspoke. Under the baseline, without this legislation enacted, it's a break-even LNG delivered price of $9.07 per 1,000 cubic feet. And then with the proposed legislation, again, in our baseline, it's $8.48 per 1,000 cubic feet. And again, those represent holding all other assumptions equal to our baseline modeling, the $1.50 per 1,000 cubic feet purchase price to the producers, and then our $46 billion capital cost assumption. And you can see how higher or lower prices and then higher capital cost would impact the required break-even price from there.
Representative Fields.
Are we doing questions now or waiting till the end of this?
I'm trying to wait till the end.
Okay, I'll wait.
Thank you.
40 more slides. Don't worry.
We are going to forego the sectional analysis just for the committee's
Okay,
aware.
Cost.
Let's move
And
forward.
so that's kind of what's being referred to when folks are talking about how this bill would help de-risk the project. And you'd see a similar sort of impact for municipal revenues, but with even bigger numbers since the majority of the property tax impact is on the municipal revenue side.
And just to put a note there, with all of the impact to the municipal revenues, and I'd like to see similar slides of your analysis and what you think the proposed impact would be to not just to the state but also to the municipalities in the future, or you can provide it to us and we can distribute it to the committee.
Absolutely, be happy to do that.
Thank you.
All right, I have 2 more sensitivity slides, and then we'll be done with sensitivities. Slide 36 is what's called a tornadoes chart. This shows a sensitivity of how a handful of key assumptions could impact the break even for in-state gas costs. So again, $4.86 in 2033 is our baseline break-even price for price to utilities for in-state sales that would be required under the current law analysis. And the biggest ways to reduce that price would be through property tax relief and through a lower gas price paid to the producers. The biggest risk on the upside is project cost as well as gas cost paid to the producers. And so that's why we highlighted those 2 specific assumptions to do our more detailed sensitivity analysis earlier. So what this bill would do effectively is it would de-risk that capital cost a little bit in addition to the direct property tax relief.
There's no blue on the right side.
For clarification,
Yeah, through the chair, did you say 486 was the break?
Representative Colomb, through the chair, correct, $4.86 in 2033 dollars. And then slide 37 is a similar tornado chart, but looking at the break-even delivered LNG price. $9.07 is the baseline price under our current law analysis. And again, there's some factors that could reduce that, property tax being one of them, a lot of risk on the upside, with the largest piece of that being a potential capital cost overrun or capital costs coming in higher than what we're assuming in our modeling. And so the legislation before you would reduce the property tax, as shown in that top line, but then it would also de-risk that potential impact of a capital cost overrun in the second line. And that's important, especially if there's a chance that project costs will come in higher than that $46 billion that we're assuming in our modeling.
Which it will.
So some conclusions to this modeling exercise. So the Alaska Natural Gas Pipeline Project, if it's constructed, it would provide billions of dollars to the state, to the federal government, to local governments. It would provide a new revenue stream to upstream producers and to a midstream developer. Would provide jobs and support energy security goals, both for the state and nationally. The bill itself would reduce the tax burden on the developer, making the project relatively more economic, and it would help to de-risk the project in terms of reducing the potential negative impacts of a higher project cost or higher tax assessments, and that is an important benefit of the bill as well.
thank you. I'm going to ask the committee if you have any questions for the Department of Revenue. We'll ask those and then we'll move on back to the developer. I've got I've already started a queue just based off the hands that were.
Of course, there's going to be questions.
I've got Representative Fields up first.
Thank you, through the chair.
I wish I knew what was coming
Are
next.
the
because
treatment plant and import
I haven't
slash
previewed these
export
slides.
facilities exempt from muni property taxes under this bill? And if so, could an import plant be built, but not a pipeline, and remain exempt from property taxes under this bill? Through the chair.
Representative Fields, through the chair. So our analysis assumes that the treatment plant, pipeline, and export facility would be exempted from property taxes and replaced with the alternative volumetric tax. As to what the impacts on an import facility would be at the municipal level, I don't have the answer to that off the top of my head. One of my colleagues may.
I'll ask a follow-up, and then I'll let others say a turn. Through the chair, you briefly mentioned, I think, what you described as the complex interplay of oil taxes in this bill. Could a company that pays oil production taxes write off capital expenditures for gas infrastructure from their oil production taxes? And could you further elaborate on the interplay of oil production taxes and these tax exemptions? Thank you.
Sure, Representative Fields, to the chair. So I've said many times that we have one of the most complex oil and gas fiscal systems in the world. That pertains primarily to our oil and gas production tax. So the way the production tax works is for gas, we have a gross tax of 13% of gross revenue to the producer, with a tax ceiling of 17.7 cents per thousand cubic feet for qualifying in-state sales on that gas. For oil, we have a net profits tax with a 35% headline tax rate, a 4% gross minimum tax floor, and per barrel tax credits ranging up to $8 per taxable barrel of oil production. Any lease expenditures for a field that is producing both oil and gas, any lease expenditures are allowed as deductions in the net profits portion of the oil production tax. And then any tax credits and the application of the 4% gross minimum tax floor are applied to the entire statewide tax liability. So there is an interplay where lease expenditures for additional development in a field that's producing both oil and gas can be applied against the oil portion of the production tax. And then there's an interplay where the per taxable barrel tax credits can reduce your entire tax liability, subject to a limitation that some of those tax credits may not reduce below the minimum tax floor.
Dan Stickles, the man. Can you believe that a government employee in the state of Alaska just answered that question without notes, without looking down at his computer, without nothing? He just rattled it right off, kept the pace slow, gave all the information. Having interacted with him, I trust that he just gave us the 100% truth. Just like that. I really appreciate Dan Stickle. He is one of my favorite characters in dealing with people in state government. He's going to go far, or as far as he wants, I guess. Anyway, I don't know how to explain any of that he just talked about, other than the answer to the question. I think that Representative Fields is asking is yes, there's an interplay between the taxes that the oil companies are going to be paying on the oil side with whatever they might be spending on the gas side. And I think that the answer there is yes, there could be some implications where some oil company might be paying less in taxes because they're writing off the capital costs of the gas project. Okay. That's what I think Representative Fields is getting at. We could see a reduction, some amount of reduction in revenue to the state from the oil companies based on the capital costs of the gas line, if I understand the question correctly. Okay, time check. We've been here a while.
Thank you.
This is important, though. This is probably one of the most important briefings we've had this year.
Thank you, through the chair. And I'll also just take one topic at a time. So I want to push back a little bit about the necessity of this particular approach to being necessary to accomplish this project. So folks are going to hear me say this multiple times. There's three impacts that we're looking at here on the project: state income, local property taxes, and consumer rates. So the way with current regulations and statutes, the way we have things now, the state is already foregoing some corporate income tax rates on the upstream and on the midstream. Glenfarne, AidStar, both S corps. It's noted on slide 26 that there's no corporate income tax in that piece. This bill puts the majority of the burden of giving up more income on the local property taxes. When we look at the slides in the early 30 pages, there's of what's being given up by the municipal revenue, there's more available revenue on the state level. So there are other levers, and of course, the consumer rates is another piece in there. So this is just one piece. This is only looking at the local municipal property taxes. There are other levers that we can push with these scenarios and not changing anything else to forego state income instead of local property taxes. Is that an appropriate characterization?
Representative Mears, through the chair, to the question of are there other levers that we can pull? Yes, that's an appropriate characterization.
Thank you.
Well, Representative Sadler missed his turn, so Representative Colomb.
Thank you, through the chair. I had one of my questions already was asked.
Yep.
My other question was the 46 billion capital cost assumption. Where did that come from?
Representative Colomb, to the chair. So that came from an assumption that was provided to us by AGDC in 2023, and we have brought that up to $2026 based on inflation. So that was an estimated project cost prior to Glenfarne taking over as developer of the project.
It was 30 something and it got bumped up.
Okay, so if I remember, so the number we usually talk about is 44 billion. So from 2023 to now, it's just 2 billion more.
Representative Colomb, through the chair, essentially, yes, that would just reflect whichever base year you're looking at for the 44 to the 46 would be just an inflation assumption.
Okay, thank you.
And that was going to be my question. Representative Prox.
Thank you. Through the chair, do you have anything else on your plate for the next at least 2 or 3 weeks?
Representative Prox, to the chair, yes.
Cancel those appointments. Have you thought about, well, with that 2 or 3 week thing, this is a complicated decision we have to make, and it's disappointing that we haven't been thinking about it for a year, frankly. So have you looked at
about it 3 or 4 years
in terms of how we got to think about this, the cost to the project of a delayed decision? Somebody's expecting us to have this made. Glenfarne had talked about having the FIDC decision in December, and hours later, no fault, that those things happen. But if how are we going to come to something in a month? Well, for the sake of discussion, assume we can get this decision made by the 21st of May. Have you thought about the cost of delaying this decision? Do we have any guess on how much we're increasing the cost, increasing the risk by overanalyzing this, if you will?
Sure. Representative Prox, to the chair. So from our role in Department of Revenue of maintaining the modeling, we can certainly run numbers for what happens if we shift everything out another year. I would defer to AGDC and the project developer for more of a qualitative assessment of how that would impact the viability of the project in the market.
Yeah, it's important.
Absolutely.
We have to make a decision, but on the other hand, we can't rush and get into a bum deal. The other one, have you looked at an alternative from the state, especially is getting an ownership share. I think part of the agreement is the state could invest up to 25% or something like that. Have you looked at the impact of the state buying?
Representative Prox, to the chair, yes, we've looked at those options extensively over the years. So this gas monetization modeling, this is a continuation of an effort that we've been making for decades. So we've absolutely looked at scenarios for state investment. I don't have those ready to present here today.
Okay.
The proposal before us at this time is for a developer-led project without a state investment at this time.
I think it would be helpful to know, well, the potential income side to the state, but also reducing the investment risk. Another financer is in there, that's the state, and cost of interest and all those kind of things.
Right.
It'd be helpful to have that.
Yeah, Representative Proxy, the chair, would be happy to put something together. Generally speaking, so in the modeling, I mentioned that we assume a 10% internal rate of return.
Right.
That would be basically the starting point for our assumptions on a state investment as well.
Okay.
Okay, let's talk for a minute. Okay. So I'm looking at the comments here, looking for where I want to start. Let's start at the most recent and work our way back, because that might be fruitful here. Deshana says, so we have 25% to invest. Yeah, because we have a great track record. Yeah, so the point here is that the project, so the state of Alaska still maintains 25% ownership in the project. But we're gonna have to figure out what we do with that. And I could be wrong here with my analysis and my thinking, the way I understand this, because if you're going to be a owner of the project, then what is it that, how are you demonstrating that ownership? Is it just because it's your project and you sold it to them and you have 25% ownership, or are you getting something for it? Are you investing in the project with dollars or what? So I don't fully understand what that 25% ownership actually means with regard to decisions. You just heard Dan say all of our projections here and the analysis of this bill is because we have a private owner of the project. Not we have a private owner of the project and we have a state owner of the project, co-owners of the project. They're looking at the project being the Glenfarn. They're the owner of the project. So it is unclear to me right now what 25% state ownership means at this point. That's a legitimate question that I'll have to, I would have to get back to you on that as to what that actually means. What I think it means is that if we're going to maintain 25% ownership, we have the ability to maintain 25% ownership, but we would have to cough up some money to invest in the project, just like any other owner that would want to participate in the project. So Glenfarn would be looking at us as a 25% owner and say, okay, well, it's $46 billion. 25% of $46 billion, and you can be owner. Otherwise, you're not an owner. You've got a opportunity to be a 25% owner, but you don't unless you buy in. So last time I checked, we are not sitting on a bunch of money outside of the permanent fund to be able to invest in a project like this. Now, do you want to go into debt to do it? You want to put a bond out there? I don't even know if that's the scale here really matters, whether you could do that or not. You got a couple $2 billion in the CBR, the Constitutional Budget Reserve. You could scrape together a couple billion probably, and all the just empty out the bank accounts. Your earnings reserve account, it's got billions of dollars in it. That's all of your interest that you earned, your investment earnings from the permanent fund. And it's probably $14 billion. I could look it up real quick, but it's probably somewhere around $14 billion. Some of that is unrealized gains. So we would have to sell some things to realize that those dollars. But anyway, I think that's about it for where you've got money to drop on a project like this. So if that 25% owner means that if you're going to exercise that, you got to buy in. The legislature has spent its money on operating expenses over the last decade. We used to have $16 billion in our savings account. We spent it on operating expenses. It's one of those opportunities where you're looking at a great business opportunity. If I had the money, I don't have the money. Somebody else is going to have to capitalize on it because I don't have the money. Don't have a rich uncle that's going to bail me out. Although in this case, maybe the federal government is going to help bail us out. I don't know. We'll see how bad Trump wants this project to go forward. Maybe a portion of that $40 billion is going to be federal money. Or I keep saying 40 billion. It's not 40 billion. It's more than 40 billion. Anyway, whatever that number ends up being. I guess another way to look at it is a permanent fund could be directed to invest in the project, although that would be sacrosanct. Like that would be a major fight, and you're not going to get that done in a month. I guess the legislature could direct the permanent fund to invest in this project. That is, I think, theoretically possible. Yeah, Kevin says we have to buy in. So that's kind of what I thought too. Yeah, Christopher, we don't have 25%. That's exactly right. I guess you guys are getting it, right? Okay. Yes, there are some lefties on the program, on the committee. You've also got Representative Fields, who is tied in with the public unions, and the unions in the state really wanted to be Glen Farn. There was an opposite, a second player, if you will, trying to do what Glen Farn got sold the project or got given the project. And I think that the unions are a little butthurt about that. But my understanding is they couldn't come up with the money that Glen Farn had, the $150 million back in 2020 or whenever it was that Glen Farn came on. But there was a $120 million that was necessary or assumed to be necessary projected to be necessary to get through FEED, front-end engineering and design. And Glen Farn had that money. It's their money. If the project doesn't go forward, they spent that money to get through FEED, and they don't get to recoup that, I don't think. Craig, you know something I don't know? Or maybe he's just super talented and he's going to go somewhere else. I don't know. Okay. I think that's where I'm going to stop there. Oh, here's a good question. Deshana, you said, so just to clarify, no impact on to the PCE, or what's the deal with that, if any? You're talking about power cost equalization, and if that's what you're asking about, this has nothing to do with that. Other than if you wanted to find $1 billion to invest in a pipeline, there's a $1 billion sitting in the PCE the legislature could rob. Not suggesting they do that, but technically it's possible. But no, the PCE has nothing to do. The Power Cost Equalization Fund has, to my knowledge, nothing to do with the gas line pipeline. Hey, I might find some clips from this presentation and bring it forward as shorts or reels. So we'll see what we can do. Okay. Let's see here. I'm not sure how much longer this. Well, we've got 56 minutes, but I'm not sure if it's all on this bill. I don't want to go 56 minutes.
And I'll give somebody else a chance.
Thank you. I'm next on my queue.
It's a good thing I did that.
We have lots of questions, and I really, similar to Representative Prox, we will be asking you to return back to House Resources to further analyze some of these questions. But because you're the person who's sitting in front of me, I I talk with my my local borough mayor, and I know that other folks are as well. I know that there were conversations that were being had starting in December, continuing into January, and occurring weekly with AGDC. And I don't know if you're a part of those conversations, but can you describe the coordination, and maybe it's AGDC who answers this question, the coordination with all of the affected municipalities as this was developed, and do the municipalities support this bill?
Yeah, Co-Chair Fryer, I would defer that question to AGDC or perhaps to Senator Begich.
Okay. Well, I saw Mr. Kissinger nod his head in the back, and so maybe we can ask him to come up to the testifiers table.
It is a dynamic conversation that is going on, right now and through this week and likely next week. It's a very collaborative effort. I think Mayor Machicki mentioned something like feeling like it was a partnership. I think when he was down here in Juneau a few weeks ago. We hope that that's still the feeling that they have. I suspect that this will move a little bit over the coming week. But we are definitely taking into account the views of the municipalities. Senator Begich, did you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, Madam Chair, for the record, it's Mark Begich. I hope you can hear me.
Yes, we can hear you.
Very good. Let me elaborate even more detail. We are in constant conversation. Matter of fact, we had a meeting yesterday with the mayors. It was, or day before, very positive. It was on the elements they're looking at in general. They support the concept of the volumetric tax, the alternative tax. They have some issues in regards to the floor, we call it, in the bill, as well as the inflation factor of adjustment of the rate. All mayors, even as like I said, Tuesday, very good conversation. Your mayor is actually out in Houston right now for a conference, so we were unable to connect him in. But we've had conversations last week. All the mayors were contacted not only by myself via text or call or individual, by the governor, as well as by Frank at the AGDC, saying that it is a collaborative effort because it's important to get their input, because at the end of the day, frankly, they're the ones that are impacted in the sense of their revenue stream or potential revenue stream. As we say in this project that, there is no project, there is no revenue stream until there is a project. So but we are definitely having these conversations, not only directly, individually or collectively with mayors, but also individually with some of their team. And in the case, as Matt has identified, AGDC is hosting those. And then there's additional meetings that are continuing to happen. Like I said, last night I was on a phone call with the mayor of Fairbanks for a period of time. And Friday we have a meeting with the mayor of Kenai. So it's a constant communication.
Thank you. There was a Representative or Co-Chair Dybert had a follow-up question.
Thank you, Co-Chair Freer. While we have Mr. Begich here in front of us, my question is, I'd just be curious, as a follow-up to Representative Freer's question, which entity requested this specific revenue measure in lieu of standard property taxes?
As Matt laid out, and he can lay out a little bit more, but in every kind of research or documentation or analysis of this project, property taxes have always been on kind of the issue of the state's amount as well as local communities' amount. Mill levy is very high compared to other jurisdictions. So that's come through multiple reports by independent analysis that we should look at the property tax. So the bill has been introduced at the governor's request to the legislature to adjust this. And the volumetric tax is a lot of positives to it. In the case of, for example, right now, if you're a local community, take Kenai, with any of the 5 that are affected, you have to value the current assets that oil and gas companies have. That's the current assessment process. The skill sets and the capacity for municipalities to assess those appropriately always seem to be ending up in litigation against the oil and gas companies. Matter of fact, there's one that the state has that I think is now 10 years of litigation. This simplifies it. The valuation is not the issue, it's the flow that goes through. You can count what goes through on a daily basis. It's easy to calculate, lowers the risk of litigation. But the state has requested that via the governor, but it has come up time and time again in every report for years that this is a problem component of the financeability of this project.
I believe Representative Fields had a follow-up.
Okay. I'm not sure I want to listen to that, but maybe I will. So here's the challenge we have. Representative Freer asks a question. She says, and it's it was really quick, and you might not have caught it, but she asked, do the boroughs support this bill? There's a reason she's asking that, right? Because she's already had conversations. Like I've already had conversations. I think lukewarm would be a understatement. It would be overstating. Be overstating the support that the boroughs are seeing for the governor's proposal here, this bill, and the ask to move to this type of volumetric tax. Because what it does is it at the same time it removes the local jurisdiction, the local borough's ability to manage its own property taxes with regard to the project. Okay, so the mayor and those on the north slope, all the way down to the south slope, down to the Kenai Peninsula Borough mayor, they're looking at this and saying, okay, you've just taken away my ability to negotiate taxes, property taxes, with the entity that's going to be in my borough. So it would be like any other business moving in. Walmart moves in and the state says, okay, we're preempting any property tax that the borough might charge you. And the borough's like, what the heck? Like, what happened to local jurisdiction and local choice, right? And local control. So there's a battle brewing here that Mark Begich is saying, hey, we're in lockstep. We're coordinating. We're doing everything that needs to be done. We're all working together to get this done. Okay. So of course that's what he's going to say. Other people might have a different opinion of that. I will just leave it at that. Okay. But you and I, what we need to hear, how are local boroughs going to be reimbursed if it's just to cover costs? If it's just to cover costs, how is the borough going to be reimbursed for the costs of the impact of the project in their boroughs, in their jurisdictions, before this alternative tax comes into play? So for the first 10 years, Dan Stickles said we're templating that the ramp up period is only 2 years. Okay, well that's good. Now, what if it's 3 years? What if it's 4? What if it ends up being 10 years because there's an incentive there to not pay taxes if it takes 10 years to do the ramp up? I'm being sarcastic a little bit because I don't think anybody wants to stay in ramp up for 10 years. But the point is, whatever period of time that is, if there's not the cost sharing, which is what the alternative tax is going to do, it's going to share revenue sharing. It'll share revenue with the boroughs. Okay. If that, and if I remember correctly, it would be at the 2 mills rate. Okay. Just like if you had 2 mills of property tax, then that's the sharing that would go on. Okay. Equivalent. But that's only after the ramp up period ends. So what happens before the ramp up period? That's, I think, what we need to hear. The people need to hear, the borough residents, because why? Why is that important to us? It's because if you don't get reimbursed, if you don't have some revenue coming in to cover the expenses that the borough is incurring, then the property tax owners, the property tax payers in the borough cover those costs. So the borough has no alternative at that point. If there's more road traffic or more kids in schools or whatever, and the state's not going to allow any property tax, then the borough is going to have to raise property taxes on other taxpayers in order to pay the bill. Let's just say that the project ends up with a significant amount of landfill in the Kenai Peninsula, or I don't know what they do up on the North Slope. It's got to be a landfill or something up there. What if there's a significant amount of cost associated with waste that's coming to the landfill? If the project is not being taxed to cover that, and there's not a reimbursement schedule for that, a way to pay for it to cover that cost, then other taxpayers are going to cover that cost. I'm just using that as an example. I don't even know if that's a good example. But that's going to be the argument of the boroughs, is how do we cover our costs? And right now, what we've heard thus far, and I haven't read the bill, so I can't tell you specifically. And that's honestly, that's what you got to do. You got to look at the bill rather than just listen to what people are saying. But again, I have experience doing that. You don't necessarily. Point is, I haven't read the bill. I don't know specifically what's happening to reimburse boroughs during that period before the alternative tax comes in. And I don't think there is anything. I think the plan that the state has put together is heavy on the state, and the borough is kind of an afterthought. And that would be in keeping, in my opinion, with other things that I've seen come from this administration. So I am concerned about that. I think the legislators that are kind of asking questions at this point, and this is preliminary, right? It's the first reading of the bill in this committee. They're going to have to have to continue asking those questions. Anyway, yeah, Kevin, I'm sorry if you're already gone. Thanks for coming in. Thanks for the feedback. Appreciate you joining and asking questions and participating, Deshauna. Look, I'm gonna end the end of the show here. You can go to KTOO's website, ktoo.org, and watch the rest of this if you want to. I think we've got a pretty good synopsis here of the state's position and what this bill is going to do, and the decision that Representative Prox was right. They've got the remainder of this session, and that's not completely accurate. You also could have a special session, but holy cow. During an election year, none of those incumbents who are running for election want to see a special session. But that may be what happens. If they cannot, if those that would like to see the property tax stay the way it is, if those that would like to see the pipeline get scuttled, if those who have a vested interest in dragging their feet are able to drag their feet and cause a decision to not happen within this regular session, then you can be sure the governor is going to call a special session to address this bill. You can guarantee it. It's going to happen. I hope they're thinking about this, because the governor is going to have to do it. Anyway, thanks all for participating tonight. I'm going to watch the rest of this, and if there's more information that we need to catch up on, we'll finish it on another night. Maybe we'll bring it up tomorrow, and we can chat about it then. But I think this gives us a good starting place. What are you saying, Christopher? Bottom line, the consumer will pay the bills. Yeah, don't you always? With the exception that you're not paying for your operating budget, other than with your PFD, and that's what's interesting is Senator Dunbar on the Senate floor in yesterday or today. It was yesterday's floor session where they added the S Corp tax to the marathon royalties bill. Senator Dunbar said, we're already taxing people by taking their dividend. He acknowledged that on the floor. I was so proud of him. It's exactly what's happening. You are paying for state government through your permanent fund dividend that doesn't come to you. You just don't see it. You don't see the $2,000 that you're already paying for tax, and your children are paying as well, by the way. Anyway, one way or the other, Christopher, we're going to pay for it. You don't do anything and they build the pipeline. I don't even know if that's possible, because we just heard that you got to do something with this tax in order for the pipeline to go forward. You don't do this and we don't have a pipeline, then you know what you've got? You get a wing and a prayer for more gas out of Cook Inlet, or you have imported LNG from Canada. That's what you got for Alaskans. So I'm hopeful that they can figure this out and they can move this this project forward. But Prox is right. It's gonna take a while, and it may suck the oxygen out of the room for other things that people want to see conversations about, like restructuring permanent funds and education spending and other taxes. This is a big deal. And they're going to have to deal with it. Okay. I wish you all the best tonight. We'll pick this up tomorrow, and we'll see you again 7:00 tomorrow night. Have a good night, all. Thanks for joining.